Back in the day in college, one of the CDs I used to spin was a little Boys to Men, End of the Road. That's where we're at tonight, Yanni. We've come to the end of the road on the division previews with the AFC South. It's been a fun ride, man, but I can't be too sad about it. Can't get too sentimental because we're actually going to get some games.
It's kind of good and bad, right? I mean, the bad is we're through it, but obviously the good is that means things are ramping up. So, I mean, I'm excited.
I'm excited, too. I mean, I've enjoyed even preseason football too much, to be honest. So
it is
good
wild,
to get to the real thing.
I'm watching guys that we know aren't making the 53-man roster, and I'm invested in it. I'm like, this is great. So I hear you, man. I hear you.
Yep, 100%. All right, well, hey, let's just jump straight into the AFC South here. We got 4 teams. As always, that's a stupid comment. By this time I should be better than that, but I'm not. But it should be a good division, a competitive division. So we're just going to go in alphabetical order. Start out with the Houston Texans, who were last year's surprise team. I definitely did not see them challenging for the division last year. I think CJ Stroud exceeded even the people who were highest on him exceeded their expectations. Didn't see him coming in and being one of the more efficient passers in the NFL. They've added some pieces in the offseason, Stephon Diggs being one of the big ones. Yanni, this is a team that now comes into this season with high expectations. They're favored to win the division plus 105, so almost even money to win the division. Over under 9.5, but shaded to the over quite a bit, minus 144 to the over, plus 118 to the under. Yanni, is this a team that's going to live up to what are now very high expectations in the Lone Star State?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, let's take a real quick look at the division as a whole before we look at Houston here. This division is as competitive, in my opinion, as any out there, and
Yep.
good. I mean, I think these teams are good. Now, are these 4 Super Bowl caliber teams? Probably not. I mean, obviously, Houston would be the one that you would look at and say, well, maybe they could get there. At the end of the day, though, this is going to be a very, very tough and competitive division. So I think the winner of this division is going to be tested heading into the playoffs because they're going to have some challenging games within the division. You mentioned kind of where Houston sits there, rightly so, but you also touched on something that I think is really, really important, and that is when you're coming out of nowhere, it's a little bit easier. It becomes a little bit tougher when you have the bullseye on your back. And I mean, that starts this year with them, that they have that schedule. I have them in this division by far with the toughest schedule. I actually have it as the 5th hardest ranked here, throughout the week.
We're tied.
So
I have them 5th hardest as well. So
yeah. So, I mean, not easy, and obviously we'll get to the other teams and talk about them and where they fall. But, you look at that schedule, you look at the target on the back, and you wonder how much of an impact is that going to have? So when we rewind back last year, CJ Stroud was magnificent. And I'll be the first to say I whiffed hard on this Houston Texans team last year. I did not expect much from them. I did not expect much from CJ Stroud. I had that Ohio State quarterback bias and I was living with it. And obviously, halfway through the season, I'm like, all right, well, I got to admit I was wrong on this one here, but that happens. That's okay. When you look forward, though, you say, okay, is he this guy? Is he that great? I think the answer is yes and no. And what I mean by that is I think he's going to be that top 10 quarterback for probably the next dozen years. Do I think he's maybe as good as he's getting credit for right now? I don't know. I need to see a little bit more. I mean, I see these rankings where I see him ranked number 2, number 3, number 4, and I'm like, whoa, slow down just a little bit here, So let's see where he goes. Obviously, he proved it last year. Let's see if he can do it again. I take a look at their offseason here, and there was some good, but also maybe some fooled you. And what I mean by that is when I look at the players that they acquired in the offseason, they brought some big name guys in. Danielle Hunter, who I know you're familiar with, Joe Mixon, Stephon Diggs, who you mentioned. These are all pro caliber players. These are Pro Bowl guys, but these are also guys that are kind of entering the twilight of their career here, right? I mean, how much do these guys have left in the tank? Mixon obviously is at that age where running backs kind of slow down. And, he was never an extremely quick guy to begin with. Diggs, I think we saw kind of lose a little bit of a step over the last year or so. Danielle Hunter, when he's on the field, he's effective, but, he's a guy who's battled injuries quite a bit over the last 3 or 4 seasons. So, how much of an impact will those guys have? I don't know. I think we have to wait and see on that. I do love the signings that they brought in on defense, though, with Danico Autry and Azeez Al-Shaair. I think those are two really, it's funny because if you say, what did the Texans do in the offseason? Oh, Danielle Hunter, Stephon Diggs, right? I don't know that those are going to have the impact that a guy like Al-Shaair is going to have, or Danico Autry. I mean, these are good guys to rotate in on that defense and, help provide a pass rush there. I think this is going to be a really good defense, which when you think about the Texans now, you think offense. It's almost like the Chiefs a year ago where it's like, I'm sure the offense is going to be able to do what they need to do, but really this could be a good team defensively. So, I kind of see that. There's one other thing that I like about this Texans team, and normally we don't get into it a whole lot, but they have a good backup quarterback too, because they have Davis Mills, who's been proven that he can play in this league, and he's been in this system now. So he knows the team. He's familiar. Stroud's out for the year. Probably not going to matter. Stroud's out for 2 games. You could probably not skip a beat. Again, little bit of a hyperbole there by saying not skip a beat, but I think Davis Mills can come in. So, you wrap all that up. It's a lot of stuff on offense, defense, free agency, the schedule. Where does that leave this team? I think it leaves it right exactly where they are, which is 9.5 to 10 wins. I think that that's right about where this team would be. I think that on any given Sunday, this team is capable of winning. But I also think that with the schedule, and as I mentioned, that target on that back, it's going to be a little bit difficult. And there's one thing that I really don't like from what I saw in the preseason on this team. And again, we don't put a lot of stock in preseason other than looking for trends. And what we saw in the preseason was the 2 starting wide receivers when they were running 2 wide receiver sets were Stephon Diggs and Nico Collins, not Tank Dell. I'm going to be honest with you. I think Tank Dell may be the best receiver on this roster. He's certainly the most, I think, explosive or elusive at this point. And I worry if they're going to, potentially maybe stunt his development or not get as many targets out of him because they're doing the force the ball to Diggs on a slant route, try to get Nico Collins the ball. I think a key for this team, they've got to get Tank Dell on the field a lot. I think if they do, I think their offense is going to be really good. Again, I'm pretty high on their defense overall. So I think this team can be really good, but I just think that right now it's pegged where it needs to be because of those uncertainties. I think 9.5 is probably a perfect over-under number. I see no lean strong one way or the other on my end.
Yeah, as is often the case, I think we sync up on a lot of things here. I think the target on the back thing is real. When people come into games knowing CJ Stroud's going to be good, we have to really prepare for this passing game. I will say, people ranking him number 2, 3, 4, whatever. You go back and look at the statistical categories from last year, and a lot of them, he's number 1, 2, 3, 4 in those statistical categories. Fair. Now, can he continue it? That's another question, right? Where I really agree with you is I do think we saw enough from him last year that I'd be shocked if he was like some kind of bust in year 2. Yeah. He was so good in terms of his decision-making, the quick release, the accuracy, all of those kind of things you want to see from a quarterback. And I think he's playing behind, like, this offensive line isn't phenomenal, but it's kind of similar to what it was last year, right?
Yeah, it's decent. It's good.
Yeah, it's decent. Exactly. It's fine. So if he could do it last year, I think he could do it this year, and I wouldn't be shocked for us to see a little bit of regression here. But, man, that decision-making, quick release accuracy, those are the things that I think can make a quarterback more consistent year to year than maybe some other quarterbacks we'll talk about in this division who might not have all of those characteristics.
Right.
When I look at the offensive weapons for this team, you said it about Stephon Diggs. I think he has lost a step. In Buffalo, he certainly was unhappy, and Buffalo was unhappy with him. We talked about this when we did the AFC East, but this was probably a good move on both sides. If Stephon Diggs is going to thrive, it wasn't going to be in Buffalo. Buffalo needed to get rid of him because he certainly wasn't really helping them out at this point there. You have heard coming out of Houston, I don't know if he got named a captain or not, but I heard that was getting kicked around and that he was, and this is what happens in preseason, right? I'm not putting too much stock in it because you get the veteran who comes in and it's like, oh, he's such a great guy. He's helping out all the receivers. What happens when he gets like 2 targets, 1 target, 4 targets in 3 straight games. Is he still a happy veteran at that point? Yeah, maybe not. I think I'm higher on Nico Collins than you are. I think this guy's an absolute stud. I think he's a number 1 receiver. I think overall he's the best receiver on this team. I love he and Tank Dell together, though. I think their skill sets complement each other so well.
Perfect. Yep.
Yeah, love that. And so I think what you said about having Collins and Diggs on the field at the same time, in some ways, I think at this point Collins is a better receiver, but they're kind of similar receivers in some ways. And so I don't like that if with 2 receivers on the field, they're taking Tank Dell off. I think as the season progresses, one of the things that we could look for here is Stephon Diggs willing to sort of accept like that third receiver role, even if it's a good third receiver, a receiver who's still involved, not an afterthought, but a third receiver. They also have Dalton Schultz here in the tight end spot, which is a good tight end. Man, okay, I'm about to probably exaggerate, so you can chastise me for saying this, but when I was thinking about this team, and if CJ Stroud can be anything sort of like what he was last year with the receiving weapons that this team has, it just had me thinking of the greatest show on turf, man. Like where you've got this quarterback that's making good decisions, quick release, great offensive weapons. I think the ceiling for this offense is extremely high. If CJ Stroud is able to play up to the level that he played last year with what I would say is like improved weapons even over last year. And Joe Mixon, I don't care that much about. I think he's fine. What you get out of Joe Mixon is a veteran who knows what he's doing and is just going to be steady. So I think that's better than Dameon Pierce or whatever else, though I'm not pumped about Mixon. Then you go to the other side of the ball, and you said it, I think this is going to be a good defense. I like some of the people that you called out. To me, if Danielle Hunter can stay healthy, which, as you said, is a question mark, I think he's still got a couple years left in him. I mean, this is a guy who's incredibly athletic, has been very dominant coming off of the edge, and now you've got Will Anderson on the other side, which means you've got a threat coming off both edges, and offenses are going to have to account for that, which I think is very difficult. So I like this defense overall, and sometimes what we see with teams is you get a great offensive unit, but the defense are like, oh, I don't know. Or it's a great defense, like Pittsburgh, and then the offense, it's like, oh, I don't know. To me here, I think offense with massive upside, defense that is at least average, if not above average, in the league. And I think that could be, so Anderson and Hunter, especially, like if the Texans can get out to leads and they can pin their ears back and just come after the quarterback, that's going to be a problem for opposing teams. The only thing that's holding me back on the Texans is that schedule. Right before we jumped on tonight, I was like, man, I'm really high on this team. I need to just take a stand. And I was looking through the schedule, and I'm like, you said it perfectly too, Yanni. They can win any of those games. I think this is a team that can be competitive with anyone in the league. But when you stack up the best teams in the league game after game after game after game, you're just not going to win all of them. And so this is a team that I think in the playoffs can be extremely dangerous. I don't even think I don't know what the line is. It's probably not good enough to take it, but if at some point in the season you can get an okay line on Houston to win the Super Bowl, I don't think it's a terrible thing to look at, because I think they have that kind of upside. But stacking up the schedule that they have, I have them at 10.1 wins, which 9.5 minus 144. We're pretty close there, right? Like I'm not going for that. But this is a team that I am really looking forward to watching, and excited. One other thing I'll say here that will be interesting to see if there's regression is last year they had a plus 10 turnover differential, which a lot of that was CJ Stroud just taking care of the ball. So if they can do that again too, that's obviously a huge plus on their side.
One of the things I looked at, as I was kind of looking at different betting options and props, was CJ Stroud interceptions, more out of curiosity than anything.
Interesting.
And depending upon the book, FanDuel, DraftKings, it's 9.5 or 10.5, which seems like a high number based on what we saw last year. But I think that's kind of a reality when you say, there may be a little regression. Like, can they take care of the ball as well as they did a year ago? We'll find out on that. I think, it's almost like you said, when you've done such a nice job taking care of the ball like they did, it's bound to regress a little bit there. And I think that's, that is a little bit of what we're seeing. One other thing we didn't talk about on the defense is they have a very, very deep secondary too. When you look at it, they brought some guys over, as depth pieces there that I mean, again, I think this defense has the potential, like you said, to be really, really good if guys like Hunter can come in and stay healthy and contribute in that. But I'll say this team reminds me more. You mentioned the greatest show on turf, and I mean, I'll push back a little bit on that.
Yeah, I knew you would.
Well, I mean, you look at the way that offense, a lot of that ran through Marshall Faulk. So, I mean, we're not going to see that with Joe Mixon. And, and I just think that the speed is the difference. Obviously, we know Tank Dell has some speed, but I think when you look at Collins and Diggs, when you look at guys like Isaac Bruce and Torrey Holt, I mean, it's a little different there. But what I like in this team too a little bit more is more of like the Indianapolis Colts of those mid 2000s there, where, they've got a quarterback who I think is, at this point we can say is cerebral, knows how to read a defense, can generally take care of the ball. You kind of, like you said, have that veteran running back like Edgerrin James, wasn't necessarily splashy, but, he could get the job done out there. And then you have these receivers that were more I don't want to call them possession receivers because that's not fair, because both Harrison and Wayne could get downfield. But I think that when you look at like Collins and Diggs, it's more of like a Harrison and Wayne. So that's kind of what this team reminds me of. And when you switch it to the other side of the ball, it's kind of the same thing. You mentioned building a lead. What did the Colts do? It's like they tried to get a lead, and then it was like Freeney and Mathis, go get the quarterback.
Right.
Quarterback. And, like you said, you got Will Anderson and potentially Daniil Hunter and some opportunistic defensive backs there. So, I think this is one of those ones where almost like the Dolphins, where if they can get up in games, they're going to be impossible to beat, right? I think the way that you probably beat this Texans team is you get after them early, force them to be more one-dimensional on your end. You can be, more open. So, that way you can run the ball. Because I don't know that their run defense is going to be great. We'll see. I don't know that it's going to be bad, but I think when you kind of look at, okay, there's no all-stars potentially stopping the run versus some of these other positions. So a lot to look at with this team, but like you said, they'll be one of the fun ones to watch. And I think, we'll see this team. This is probably going to be a contender for the next half a dozen years. I mean, it certainly looks that way right now. So we'll see, how quickly they can put it together, or do they have a regression? I mean, we'll see. It's going to be fun to watch.
Yep. Anything on player props or anything else for the Texans?
Yeah, let me see what I got here. So actually this is tough for me, but I took the under on Tank Dell receiving yards at 825.5. And I did it strictly for the reason of what I said. I think his snap count and his target count comes way down. Now, he's the type of guy that can make an 80-yard reception. So, he could take chunks out of that total throughout the year. And of course, we don't know. I mean, if Collins or Diggs gets dinged up, all of a sudden he's on the field a lot. And quite frankly, and I'm high on Collins too. I like Nico Collins too. I just think that like the chemistry that Stroud and Dell seem to have, it was like they were in sync last year. And that's why I was like, the mistake they could have is kind of benching that for Stephon Diggs, who's past his prime. That's kind of where I'm at. But I think the under is in play, because if he goes from, playing 70% of snaps to playing 50% of snaps, now you're saying, is he going to get to that 1,000 yards? I mean, you mentioned Dalton Schultz. Like how many catches are there to go around with Collins, Diggs, Schultz? I think that under to me that number was just a little bit high.
Yeah. That makes sense. And kind of a good thing about those bets is most people are not going to think Tank Dell and automatically think under. And so looking for those spots where it isn't necessarily where you would automatically go, but there are reasons to think that it could go in that direction, I think is a good way to look. I had sort of thought about pass catchers here under in general, just because of the variety of weapons that they have. So, there's nothing I'm really interested in betting here, but I think that's a way you could look.
Yeah, and because of those pass catchers, I mean, you could look at CJ Stroud's passing yards or touchdowns over, but the number set so high. It's at 40, 250 or whatever. I mean, if that number were a little lower, I think you could look at that and say, well, they got so many weapons. It's number's just too high. I mean, I think the books accounted for that.
Yep. I agree with you. All right. Well, let's move on from the Texans to the team from my state, who I do cheer for a little bit, mildly at least. Nothing like the Vikings, but it's the Indianapolis Colts. Shane Steichen, of course, leading the way here again. Anthony Richardson coming back from that injury after he wowed everyone with his legs until he predictably got hurt last season. This year, their over-under is set at 8.5. About even money. It's a little bit juiced to the under 8.5, minus 128 is what I saw today. Plus 310 to win the division is the third best odds. I have them with the 24th hardest schedule in the league. Yanni, what do you think about this year's Colts?
Well, it looks like our strength of schedules for this division are pretty accurate together, because I have them 24th also.
Wow.
To me, this team is a little bit opposite of Houston, in the sense that I don't know that this team is great, but their strength of schedule, they've got a lot of winnable games. So, it's kind of the reverse. It's like, maybe they're not that great, but they can win a lot of these games. So, again, that strength of schedule just becomes so important when you look at that there. And of course, we never know throughout the season which teams might be up or down due to whatever injuries or play or whatever. But going into it, there's a lot of potential there. So I liked what this team did in the draft. First of all, I think that, they took a defensive end early, who is potentially, that double-digit sack guy, or at least that's what they're hoping. Good rotational piece as a rookie, I'm sure. And then Adonai Mitchell, he's a high-risk, high-reward guy. There were a lot of question marks on him coming out, but man, that dude is talented. He can play. So can he have his head on straight? Can he, be a part of this offense? If he can, there's huge upside there. And this is a team that lacked playmaking wide receivers a year ago. We know Michael Pittman Jr. is he's the prototypical slot receiver, right? He runs that 8-yard slant and he catches it every time. That's great. But you got to have some guys like Mitchell that can stretch the field, that can make those spectacular catches and do those kind of things. So, you start adding him in with the pieces that they have there from a year ago. All of a sudden, you're like, okay, maybe they got enough guys to throw the ball to here. The offensive line played much better a year ago. The previous year, they were awful. I couldn't really figure out why. They improved a lot last year. They're going to need that again. But where I'm looking at this team, here's what I don't like about this Colts team. There's two things that I really don't like about this team. Number one is, I think their defense is built for 1980s football. And what I mean by that is, like, they've got some studs on that defense, but they're kind of like, we're going to stop the run. That's what we're going to do. We're going to get out there and stop the run. Not a bad theory if you can do that well, but the Colts don't always do that well. So, when I look at that, I'm always like, okay, where's the pass rush coming for in a league that we know is a throwing league? Well, they did draft someone, so we'll see. They brought back some of their key players, guys like DeForest Buckner and that. But, I don't know if they don't get a pass rush out of their rookie there. I don't know where that pass rush is coming from. So that worries me a little bit. And then I still think the secondary is bad. They brought Julian Blackmon over. That's a decent piece to play safety for them. But I don't like the secondary. They got torched, a fair amount a year ago. And when I look at it, I don't see how they're going to be a whole lot better. So that worries me a little bit, kind of the way their defense is structured. But offensively, and maybe he can be CJ Stroud, I don't like Anthony Richardson. I just don't. I mean, I think he's basically a bullier version of Lamar Jackson, who isn't as good throwing the football. And I don't think Lamar Jackson's great throwing the football. So, that worries me a little bit. Now, if they can get Jonathan Taylor going, if they can, get some of these receivers going, maybe they can make it easy for Richardson as he figures this game out. But when I saw Richardson last year, yeah, we saw a flash. Like, we saw, whoa, this guy's athletic. Whoa, this guy can make guys miss. In some cases, he can run over guys. But we also saw it landed him in the hospital, right? I mean, and I just, that's what I'm worried about. I just don't know. Can he play that style of football for a year? I don't think that he can. And I just don't think that he's good enough as a passer. Now, maybe he's improved. Maybe he can get there. I just don't see it. So that's my concern with this team. I don't like the way the defense is constructed, even though I do like a few of their players. I don't like Anthony Richardson. So, I have trouble with that. And, we'll get to the coaches later, but this is a coach that likes to throw the football. I mean, honestly, I think he does. And I don't know that they are going to be able to throw the football that well. So when I look at this team, I think that, again, opposite of the Texans, when I look at 8.5 wins, my first thought is, nope, they're not going to get there. This is a 7-8 win team. When I look at the schedule, I'm like, okay, maybe it's an 8-9 win team. You kind of start looking at that. So again, I think these numbers are pretty well dialed in here. I think if they play on a neutral field against the Texans probably win 7 out of 10 times, if not more. But that being said, with the schedule, they're going to be in it. I think they're going to be right there in the mix with the Texans as the season goes on, just because I think they're going to have a little bit easier road.
Yeah, man, I'm very similar. The schedule thing is so ridiculous.
Yep.
And I will a quick little aside. I like to listen to other people talk about the NFL too. I have a few podcasts I listen to, and some of them are great. Like, there are a lot of people doing good stuff out there. But one of the things that does drive me crazy is when people just break down teams in a vacuum and don't say a word about the schedule, because it can give you such a skewed perspective of what's going to happen. And granted, we're not going to be right about how good every single team is. So the schedule is going to end up looking a little different than we think it will, but it's going to be like, 10 or 15% different, not 80% different. And it just makes a huge difference. So I'm 100% with you on the Colts schedule being a big deal here. I had some of the same things written down. I like the interior of the defensive line, good run stopping. I had written down about Adonai Mitchell, watching him in the preseason, even some of the plays that he made were really exciting. I think Josh Downs, go ahead.
Did I pronounce his name wrong? Is it Adonai?
Oh, or did I pronounce it wrong?
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
We'll go with A Mitchell.
A Mitchell. Then we're both safe. All right, let's do it.
A Richardson and A Mitchell.
Yeah, there you go.
Josh Downs, good receiver. Pittman, fine. To me, with this team, what has to happen for them to win is when you talked about 80s football, even though Anthony Richardson is this new wave quarterback who runs the ball and everything, overall, I feel like this is an 80s kind of football team in general, because I think that the way that the Colts have a chance to win, other than the fact they'll play some easy teams, is to control the game, to run that RPO with Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson behind a good offensive line, move the ball slowly, methodically down the field. Even if Richardson's passing, it's probably a lot of short slants for the most part. And so they have to maintain possession for a long period of time, slow the game down, and then do the same thing on defense. Try to slow down the other team's offense, get them off the field a couple times, sort of muck it up. That's the kind of team I see the Colts being this year. And I just think that leaves so little room for error.
Right.
You can't have any turnovers. You can't have any fumbled snaps, even if you get them back, that kind of stuff. It just throws you totally off and you can't come back. Anthony Richardson, for me, you talked about him already, but I'm going to highlight this too. I don't know if he's ever going to be good, is what I'll say. This is a guy that, coming out of Florida, people talked about him as a project, and they were concerned, and it was like, well, he's going to get drafted high because look at the physical tools that he has. He's got a big arm. If he can be brought along over the course of a few years, he could be a really good player. Well, now we're looking at him going into year 2, where because of an injury, he was out most of year 1. And I know that it's only the preseason and he's getting back into things, but his passing was atrocious.
Very.
I mean, it was like Deshaun Watson from last season, atrocious. And what happens when you're that bad at throwing the ball is you end up turning the ball over, because in the NFL, the windows are tight. And so when you're a yard behind a receiver, that's an interception. When you're a yard out in front of a receiver, it's a tipped ball, and that turns into an interception. So I don't think, like you talked about Shane Steichen wanting to throw the ball, I just don't think he's going to be able to very much. Yeah. I think he's going to have to run the ball to try to set up the pass here and hope that Richardson doesn't make any big mistakes. Also, to your point, if Richardson makes it through a whole season without getting injured and being out for a significant amount of time, it'll be one of two things. One is it'll be very lucky, which could happen. Or number two, it's going to be him trying to play more conservative, which takes away from the thing that he gives you value for anyway. And then he's a bottom of the NFL type of quarterback if he's not using his legs as much. So I would like the Colts to be good, but I just don't like this team much at all. I do think because of the schedule, to your point, they can hang in there. The last thing I'll say here is you talked about the secondary. Maybe they shorted up a little, but I don't think it's a good secondary still. Think about the teams in this division. What are the Texans going to do? They're going to
Spread it
throw
out.
all over you, and your line's not going to get home. You do have Quiddy Pay, which is an awesome name. So that's something. But
Yep.
yeah, it's a good name. You're not going to get home in time. You have Jacksonville. Yes, they want to run the ball with Etienne some, but they're going to throw the ball. You have Tennessee, who totally switched up their offense now. What do they want to do? They're going to spread it out, and they're going to throw the ball, even to the running back. So Indy's defense isn't set up to deal with any of the teams in their division.
Right.
And so I think these other teams are just going to be able to throw all over them, and I think they're in trouble against all of the other teams in this division. So because of the schedule, it's hard for me to go under 8.5. But man, we talk sometimes about what would be shocking. I will be way more surprised if the Colts end up with 10 or more wins than if they end up with 6 or less. I think it could go badly south for them.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect breakdown. I mean, you're right. Like, the ceiling is probably not that high for this team. It's probably around that 9-ish win mark, right?
Yeah.
And to your point, I mean, it could definitely be lower. And again, I mean, initially I'm like, this is at best a 7-win team, but again, dug into the schedule and kind of got a little bit.
Anyone.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, well, you know, if things go their way. So, but you know, yeah, I think we don't need to repeat it. At the end of the day, like, this is just, it's almost like a poorly constructed puzzle. Like, you know, they're putting these pieces together that either don't fit right or, you know, like you said, don't match up right in the division. And I just think it's going to be a tough road for them. And I mean, unless they could just come in and absolutely dominate on the offensive line, I mean, to where Jonathan Taylor is getting 5+ yards a carry, if they can do that and get out to leads, okay, maybe they can whatever, but I don't know, man. I'm with you. I think, and you're right. I think if this team falls behind in games, are they going to be able to throw and come back?
I mean, I think if Anthony Richardson has to throw, you're in trouble.
It's not good. Yeah, not good.
No, it's not good. So, all right, any props here?
Let's see here. I do have. Actually, on Colts, I do not have anything. So no, nothing on my end. How about you?
Okay, I was trying to find down. I wrote down some numbers. I was looking at some quarterback unders. I'm going to have to find the notebook where I had it written down. But I like Anthony Richardson's under for passing yards, and I don't think it's very high. I'm going off memory now because I don't
think it's
3,200.
I think it was like 3,200. Yeah.
But for me, number one, I think he's a bad passer. So I think he's going to have some real stinkers of games.
Yeah.
And number two, like we talked about, the chances of him getting hurt for a significant part of the season, to me, 50-50. Not that he'll be out for the year, but, you know, 3, 4, 5 games.
They brought in a veteran backup quarterback. I mean, you never know if he's banged up a little bit. You know, maybe they're like, we'll sit him if things aren't going real well. You never know. Never know.
Yep. So that's actually when I didn't bet it yet, but I had 5 quarterback unders that I was looking at, and that's definitely on the list for me.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right, let's move on to last year's darling, who I think hurt both of our pocketbooks at the end of the year, which is the Jacksonville Jaguars. Doug Peterson coming back again with Trevor Lawrence, who maybe has gotten healthy. Could that perhaps help them to perform better this year? They definitely have had some roster turnover as well. People leaving, bringing people in. Their over-under this year is 8.5, and it's about even money either way. They are the second favorite to win this division at plus 270. Yanni, as I was thinking about the Jaguars and thinking about overreacting, my natural starting place with them was to be really down on the Jags. I think some of that is because of feeling screwed over at the end of last season. But sometimes I think it is important to look back at what we expected maybe in a previous year and think about what's really changed and where should the expectations be. So as you look at the Jaguars for this year, coming off that disappointment from the previous season, where do you think they come out this year?
Since we've started with schedule with the other teams, I mean, Jags, in my opinion, have a middle of the road schedule. You know, so I don't think we need to dive into schedule as much with them as maybe we did with the first 2 teams here. It's more going to be about them. Can they come out? Can they Can they beat the teams they should beat? And can they compete with the teams that are maybe better than them? That's kind of what we're looking at here. Couple things. I love the Brian Thomas Jr. signing. I think that he has potential galore. I think he's going to be, I think he's got a lot of potential. We'll leave it at that there. But here's the thing. When you look at what they did, and I kind of touched on it with the Texans as well, they brought some guys in that are big name guys. Eric Armstead, former first round pick, he's been a Pro Bowler, brought in guys like Darnell Savage, Mitch Morris, and Gabe Davis, my guys from my team there. They got Ronald Darby. But how much juice do any of these guys have left in the tank? I worry about that a lot. I worry about this defense a lot. So let's look at the offense first. On paper, the offensive line looks decent. Like, it looks pretty solid. They weren't very good last year. So, you kind of look and you wonder, are they maybe just not as good as we think they are? Or do they maybe need some time to gel? They had guys in and out of the lineup early in the season last year. On paper, they should be good. They need to be good. This team needs that offensive line to be good because they have talent. But I don't think they have supreme talent in the sense that if they're not controlling the line of scrimmage, it's not going to matter. If they can control the line of scrimmage, I think you mentioned Travis Etienne. I mean, he is a very capable player. I think, he's in line for a big year. They got some depth behind him as well. Even though, I mentioned Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas and, they've got Christian Kirk, I do worry about them throwing the ball a little bit here. They do have Evan Ingram, a nice, piece at the tight end position there. But here's kind of the thing, and it's almost similar to the Tank Dell. So when you watch the Jags in preseason, their two wide receiver sets were Brian Thomas and Gabe Davis. Christian Kirk wasn't on the field. He's almost playing primarily in the slot, which is fine. But he needs to be on the field. Lawrence has the best connection with Christian Kirk than anybody. Now, can he build it with Brian Thomas? I'm sure that's the hope. That's the goal. You know what you're going to get with Gabe Davis. And I love Gabe Davis. So this isn't slander, but I mean, he's not a game-breaking guy, right? I mean, he's got marginal speed, marginal separation. He's really in there to block. I mean, honestly, he's almost like an extra tight end out there who occasionally can get open and catch passes. So I think that they need to have really, 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 really good offensive line play to be successful on offense. But the real worry for me comes on the other side of the ball here. I don't like this defense at all. There is only one thing that I like on this defense, and that's the pass rush. Now, that's important. Obviously, being able to rush the quarterback is big, and I do think they can do that. We know their edge rushers with Josh Hines Allen. Now, I believe he's changed his name.
I saw that. I was like,
yeah, I actually, I took my kiddo to one of their training camp practices just to, go see.
Nice.
And I'm like, who is Hines Allen? So it took me a minute to figure it out. But so, Josh Allen and then Trayvon Walker has quietly become productive and, become more of a force as a pass rusher. So I think that that's going to be, I guess, a plus for them. But I don't like the secondary. I don't like their linebackers. I worry about their run defense. All of those things give me concern on the defensive side of the ball. So when I kind of look at that there, I'm not super high on this team. And yes, Trevor Lawrence is the number one pick. I mean, we've talked about it. When you really line his stats up against guys like Derek Carr and Gardner Minshew and, some of these guys that we don't think of as elite talent, he's there with them. He's not up there with, the CJ Strouds and those kind of guys as far as his numbers go. The thing that's frustrating if you're a Jags fan is you see glimpses from Lawrence where he looks like that number one guy. Like he'll drop back confidently in the pocket and he will drop a ball in the breadbasket. And you're like, wow, that's the guy. But we see far too inconsistent with that type of play from him. So I look at this, inconsistent quarterback play. We don't know what we're getting on the offensive line. And I don't think the defense is going to be very good. When you add that up to me, that's not a great formula. I mean, for me. So I think that this team is going to be very middle of the pack in the NFL. I think it's going to be that 7-8 win type team, kind of like we said with the Colts there. Do they have a little bit of upside? Yes, because I do think if Lawrence can kind of, become that elite type quarterback, then maybe they can get to that, 9-10, compete for the division type win. But I don't see it right now. I mean, I think they have too many holes in the defensive side of the ball. And one last thing I'll say, when they were more dominant in this division, it wasn't necessarily because of Lawrence. It was that defense. That defense was playing good football. And, they had a lot of guys, and they actually called it a no-name defense because, a lot of guys, it's like, well, who's this guy? I don't know where, Foye Oluwakon's from, whatever. But they played well together. And when you look at it now, it's like it's still a no-name defense, but I don't think the talent's there to kind of do what they did. So I don't really like a lot of what I see, out of this team here. I think it's going to be probably a 7-win team somewhere in that line. So, I lean under on their win total here, and I definitely don't like them to win the division.
Yeah. I'm trying not to overreact, as I said at the beginning, introducing the Jaguars. But I feel very much the same as you do. In fact, I would say I feel some similarity between the Colts and the Jags. There are differences. Like Trevor Lawrence, it probably is better than Anthony Richardson, but this feels like a prove it year to me for him. We have the excuses of he's been injured, and I'm sure he has been injured. Lots of people in the NFL are injured, and especially if it was to his throwing shoulder and different things, maybe that makes a big difference. So I'm not even saying he can't bounce back and have a good year, but it's kind of time for him to show it, I think. Also, Doug Peterson's been a good coach in this league, but last year I kept waiting for him to pull it together and get the team moving the right direction, and he could not stem the tide. Now, it's not only up to the coach to do that, but it wasn't what I expected, and it just makes me start wondering, is he dropping into the middling NFL coach kind of realm at this point? And do the Jags need something better than that? You talk about the defense. Other than the defensive line for Indy, not pumped about the defense. You talked about the rush for the Jags, which probably is a better weapon than run stoppers in the middle that the Colts have playing against these pass-heavy offenses. But if the secondary is not great, you still are probably in trouble. So you're in trouble there. Then you have a good running back in Jonathan Taylor, and you have a good running back in Travis Etienne. But the offensive line is better in Indy, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I'm not sure that Etienne is going to have as much room to run, even though he's a good running back. You talked about the pass catchers. I don't like Gabe Davis. I'll just come out and say it. I feel like this guy drops so many passes. He had another one in the preseason. He had a touchdown right in his hands from 10 yards away, dropped it. He makes some great plays, but he makes some really bad ones. You don't want to have to count on him is what I'm saying. I think the person that, other than seeing what happens with Brian Thomas Jr., how he develops, I think one of the things that I'm most interested in here is Evan Ingram.
Yep.
Again, I'm going by preseason, but also Evan Ingram's been a good player for a while, and it seemed like he and Trevor Lawrence had a little something going. And so I was trying to look for what his receiving yard numbers were for a player prop, and I wasn't able to find anything, but I think he's someone I would be interested in terms of a connection there, someone who maybe has a higher upside than what we might expect, because I don't love the receiving core here otherwise, or even with him. It's not like he's amazing. So all that to say, as much as I'm trying to not overreact, I can't find many reasons to like the Jags. In addition, and this is going to be the first one where we're very different, and I actually need to go and revise my strength of schedule numbers as we get through the end, probably, but I'm sure I won't fall too far away. I have them with the 7th hardest schedule. So wow. I do have them with a difficult schedule. I think it starts out quite a bit harder. The end of the season is a little bit easier, but Miami, Cleveland, Buffalo, Houston, those are all teams I think relatively highly of. I think that's a tough start. And then Indy, Chicago, New England, that's a win. And Green Bay, Philadelphia, again, other than New England, that's 4 games that they could win, but I think it's 50-50 games at best, right, or maybe a little worse than that. So I can see them coming out of those first 9 games with 3 wins, 3-6 or something like that. My projections, I have them at 7.9 wins, but man, it's hard for me to see it just looking at what I think will happen. I think this is more of a 7-win team, even 6. One of the bets that I'm interested in here, and I certainly have not pulled the trigger, but I think it's at least interesting, and I'd have to see if the number's still there, but the Jaguars to come in 4th in this division was plus 700. we're going to talk about the Titans yet, and they certainly have the lowest win total. They're expected to be at the bottom of this division, but between these it's volatile. Like, I can see any of these teams being pretty good, but I can see any of these teams kind of falling off and struggling this year too. So I'm not high on the Jags, man.
I hear you, man. I hear you.
Anything player prop wise you're interested in here?
Yeah, I got 2 on the Jags here. And this one's hard because, again, I think he's probably their best weapon at this point. But Christian Kirk under, much like on the Tank Dell there, I just don't think he's – also, he's been battling some of the dreaded soft tissue injury in the preseason. Yep. And, you know how that can linger. Yep. But I just don't think he's going to have enough of a workload. They're going to keep Ingram on the field. And if Brian Thomas and Gabe Davis are the starting 2 receivers – how many snaps is Kirk going to get? Is he going to get 1,000 yards? He could. I mean, he's talented enough. He's done it before. But I think with the way that this team's structured and they're going to try to run the ball and, whatever, I just don't think he's going to get there. So I like his under there. And then the over that I took, I like Trayvon Walker's over on sacks. It's 8.5. He had 10 a year ago. So, I mean, he's proven he can get to that number. And down the second half of the season, he looked really good. He was getting pressure. He kind of looked like that guy that was like, oh, okay, this is a guy that can be a dominating rusher with Josh Hines Allen on the other side of him there. Kind of like you mentioned with Houston, you can't always double team that, right? So I think that Walker, again, to me, this is just a health thing. If he stays healthy, I think he hits double-digit sacks again.
Dude, I'm sorry. I don't know why it makes me laugh every time you say Josh Hines Allen. I can't stop myself.
I know.
It's very, very rude of me.
I'm sure he got tired of being called the other Josh Allen. That's what I mean.
There you go. That's fair enough. Yeah. Josh Allen, not a quarterback. That could go in his jersey.
Right.
All right. Yeah, I like it. That Christian Kirk thing, aside from injury, is crazy to me too, because we'll see with Brian Thomas and what he can prove, but I would look at him as their best receiver. And then if you don't have him on the field much, it's just crazy.
And, a lot of times too, and I mean, obviously you want to tread cautiously because sometimes these coaches don't want to give away too much of the playbook during the preseason. So you look at that and say, okay, Kirk was a little bit dinged up, where they maybe just not showing their hand, resting him, maybe. So, I mean, who knows? Maybe Kirk comes out and plays 100% of the snaps in week 1. I don't know. But based on what we saw, it sure looked like he's purely the slot guy, 3 wide receiver sets and whatever. And, this is a team that they don't always run a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. So, we'll see. I mean, we'll see where that goes. But I just think between that potential of the injury and potential of his snap count being lower, it's really the same as Tank Dell. I like Christian Kirk. I like Tank Dell. I just think it's going to be circumstance that's going to hold these guys back.
Yep. All right. Well, let's round out this division and the division previews as a whole with the Tennessee Titans. I have them with the number 6 most difficult schedule, so I have them with a tough schedule as well. They're over under 6.5, shaded a little bit to the under, -128, plus 950. To win the division. Obviously, new coach, new scheme. Brian Callahan comes in to lead this unit and see if they can get something going without Derrick Henry and a new look offense. Yanni, can Will Levis lead this team to respectability and challenging for this division this year? Or is that a long shot?
$1 million question. I mean, there's 2 big questions for this team, right? We'll get to Levis here in a second. I think you already mentioned the other one. That's the coaching. I think, I'll be honest, I think getting rid of Vrabel was a mistake. And I understand sometimes, it gets stale and you're like, hey, we got to start over and shake it up. But I think that's a mistake. And that's no knock. I don't know anything about Brian Callahan other than what he did with Cincinnati there, which, by the way, when you've got Burrow and Chase and Higgins, I'm like, yeah, I mean, how hard is it? Throw it up, Joe. Get these guys. I don't know. We'll see. But I don't like them getting rid of Vrabel. I think that, they wanted to completely change, like you said, almost change the identity, because Vrabel, again, we're going to run the ball. We're going to play defense. We're going to play, whatever. Obviously, Callahan's going to come in and approach it a little bit differently. It's like, hey, we're going to throw the ball around a little bit. We're going to try to make plays. Maybe that's what's needed in Tennessee. But I do think that if that's going to be successful, I feel like it's going to take some time. So to answer your question off the shoot, I think that you could argue, I could buy the argument that this team made changes to their identity that are going to be good for the team. I just don't know how quickly they can do that, because I feel like when you're doing kind of really an identity overhaul, unless you've got a lot of veteran guys, and they do have some in different positions, but obviously quarterback being the most important, that to me is like, okay, this may take a little bit of time. So that's if Will Levis is the guy, which I don't think we can say for sure at this time he is. He did some nice things last year. I mean, we saw in a primetime game. I mean, he looked, he made some amazing plays. So I think he's got potential, but I'm also not sold on him to say, oh yeah, Levis is going to be the guy. And, I mean, I think we need to see a lot more from him before we get that. So, let's kind of look at this here. So the Titans' most popular player, famous player, whatever, was Derrick Henry, right? He went to the Ravens. I liken the Ravens offseason as an opposite of what the Ravens did, and I'll explain that here. So we talked about the Ravens on our AFC North preview, and we said, this team added Derrick Henry. That's cool. Like, he's a big star, big name. He could end up being good for them, but they lost a lot of pieces around, so it's like, okay, the Titans were kind of the opposite, right? Like, they lost Derrick Henry. Like, that's a big name. That's a big loss. They brought in a lot of what I think are quality guys. I jotted some down here, guys like Lloyd Cushenberry, to help up on the offensive line. Guys like Chidobe Awuzie on the defensive side, Kenneth Murray. Like, these are guys that you don't hear their names a lot. Like, Kenneth Murray isn't going to light the world on fire. Like, oh, they got Kenneth Murray. But you start putting those pieces together, and it's like, okay, this team could be pretty good because, oh, by the way, they did add L'Jarius Sneed, who, was an all-pro a season ago, or Pro Bowler a season ago. Very good corner there. They brought over Calvin Ridley, who I think we all believe has potential to be a very good number one, if not number one, number two receiver in this league. So, there's a lot there. And then when I look at their draft, I love that they addressed the offensive line early. I mean, I think we can honestly say the Titans had probably the worst offensive line in the league a year ago, if not the worst, second worst. So, they tried to address that with Cushenberry and then using their first round pick on JC Latham there. So, that should help. And then they also drafted Tavondre Sweat, who was a guy that I loved going into the draft there. Massive body, athletic guy in the middle. You put him next to Jeffrey Simmons, it's like, good luck moving those guys out of the trenches. So, yeah, and then, I think their secondary is really, really deep now. When you kind of look at the players that they have there, I love they've got some physicalness with guys like Quandre Diggs, and they even brought Jamal Adams in, who can probably be a little bit of a pass rusher, maybe like a nickel type player for them, a big linebacker in the nickel, that kind of a thing. So there's a lot on this defense that I like there. Offensively, I mentioned Ridley. I know DeAndre Hopkins is coming back from injury, so it may take a little bit there. But I think this team's going to have to get creative running the football, though. And obviously with Derrick Henry, you just kind of give him the ball and hope that he can run people over or, get outside or whatever. This isn't that same back, right, with Tajay Spears and Tony Pollard. I mean, these are different kind of guys. And Tony Pollard looked very blah last year. I mean, he really did. And, you kind of look at that and you're like, okay, well, what can he do here? I think they're going to have to be creative. And, their way to run the ball is going to have to be dump passes, screens, swing passes. They might have to do a little bit of that in order to run the football. So, again, total identity change. But here's my big concern with that. That puts a lot of pressure on the quarterback if you're not running the football. If teams don't think you can run the football, they're coming after you. And if you're a young quarterback, that's not what you need. So, we'll see. I think, again, Levis is going to be the huge question mark here. Does Levis have upside and potential? I think absolutely. Is Levis a sure thing? Absolutely not. So we're going to find out. And that to me makes this team very dangerous to bet on, because we've talked about it with probably three other teams in the league. That quarterback uncertainty, that makes it really tough here. So I do have a player prop afterwards that we can get to that actually maybe picked up on hearing me talk. But I'm curious just kind of to hear what your thoughts are, if you think, Levis is going to be able to crank it up, or where you go with this team.
If we were live, we could have people guess what it is.
Yeah, there you go.
But unfortunately, we're not. All right, Yanni. So I certainly see the downside here. An offensive line that could still be pretty porous. a quarterback who I think has upside, but if he's getting pressured a lot, is he going to make a lot of mistakes? And if he makes a lot of mistakes, he's going to put his team in positions that they can't get out of. An unproven head coach, certainly. I sort of agree. I mean, I'm interested to see what Brian Callahan can do as a head coach. I don't hate the hire. It's like, I don't know. I don't know what to think about the hire. So I see the downside, but I think, and I don't have them projected for this straight up wins wise, but I think this is a team that their upside is to challenge for the division. Mm-hmm. And here's why I would say that. Their offensive weapons are ridiculous when it comes to depth. Do they have the top number one? Maybe not. But Tony Pollard, we'll see. I agree with you. He looked bad last year, but now he's going to be back in a rotation with Tajay Spears, and they're similar kinds of backs, so it's not really that thunder and lightning kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But I think Tony Pollard will be better off if he's not carrying the vast majority of the carries. So we'll see how that goes, and I agree with you that could be an issue. But I think a lot of this comes down to play calling. If they can find creative ways to get these guys the ball in space, I think that especially Spears has upside to be able to do some damage that way. So I think there's a path to them being able to run the ball, but it's not what it was with Derrick Henry. It's a different kind of path. Calvin Ridley, huge letdown in Jacksonville, but this guy's a good wide receiver. DeAndre Hopkins, we keep waiting for him to fall off a cliff, and he just doesn't. He was really good again last year, and granted, he will at some point, but we don't have any evidence yet to say that this is the time where it's going to happen. Tyler Boyd is getting older, comes over from Cincinnati, but as your third receiver, that's a solid veteran third receiver. But even if he doesn't work out, Treylon Burks is behind there, and man, Treylon Burks at times looked like he could be a number one receiver in the past. I'm not saying he is one, but I'm just saying this guy has some physical gifts, and if he was your number three, I don't think you're in too bad a shape. Westbrook-Ikhine, they decided to bring him back, and he's another guy who has, even when he had to step in the absence of everyone else to be a first receiver, he looked okay. He's not a first receiver, but if he's your fourth receiver, I think you're in pretty good shape. Then they've got Okonkwo at tight end, who's a very good tight end. So I just think the weapons here are awesome. I like bringing in Bill Callahan to coach the offensive line. Is he going to be able to work some magic and make them like an average offensive line? No, probably not. But can he at least make them the best version of themselves? Yeah, I think he probably can. And I know that there is a case here for a huge downside for Will Levis, but man, I'm maybe not quite flag plant, but I think he's going to be good. I like what I've seen from him. I like the upside. I think he will make more mistakes than someone like CJ Stroud, so you're going to have to ride those waves out a little bit. But I think he's got a lot of good playmakers around him who are going to be able to make plays for him. And I think he's got the arm talent and decision-making to be a solid quarterback in the league. So, that's going to be my take. We can come back and make fun of me at the end of the year if it's way off. But I like what I've seen from him. And in this offense, man, I think they could really put up some points. Then you go over to the defense, and I love what you said. They filled some holes. They've got a lot of decent guys, and they have some superstars. We've talked about this all the way through, that you get a handful of superstars, and then the question is, do you have professional football players that can fill in the other slots? And I think that they do. Now, I think there's some volatility here, and I think that this is a team that I could see being in some shootouts even, like where the defense gives up some points, but they're able to score in order to keep the game close. So my biggest thing here is that the schedule for a team that finished, not that high last year isn't super favorable.
Right.
And so that's a thing that might hold me back a little bit. I haven't bet it yet, but I do like the over here. I have them just over 7 wins is where my projection is. But I think the upside is significantly higher there. In fact, in terms of just the team, if you take the schedule out of it, from where we stand today, I like this team the second most in this division. So probably a little bit crazy, but that's where I'm at with the Titans, man.
I don't think it's crazy at all. I really don't.
Yeah, well, we're going to find out. All right, you said you had a player prop. What was that for the Titans?
Yeah, I mentioned I thought Tony Pollard was blah last year. So, I'm looking at fading his rushing total, 775.5. I think Tajay Spears is the better back out of the two. I think that Pollard may start the season as running back one, and he may even start the games as running back one. But I mean, we saw a lot of Tajay Spears even when Derrick Henry was on the roster last year.
Yep.
So I think that, his pass catching ability, to your point, in this offense, I think outweighs what Pollard's going to do. And then I think, the other part of that is this team, to your point with the weapons, I mean, they're going to try to throw the ball more. I think so. To me, I look at that and I'm like, Pollard is probably at best going to get 50% of the carries. That's the way I look at it, if that. So, is he going to get to 800? I don't think so. I mean, not based off what we saw last year. And he had a more favorable situation, I think, last year, and he couldn't really get it done. So I like fading his rushing yardage here.
Yep. You talk about a team that could throw the ball to potentially allow someone to run. It's the Cowboys, right? And he couldn't get it done there. And I agree with you. I mean, I could even see if Pollard is lackluster through the first quarter of the season, that he ends up being the secondary back to Spears if Spears is playing well. So I think there's a path for that to happen too.
I fully expect that to happen, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's definitely on the table. All right, that gets us through all the teams. We are going to rate some stuff to close this out. But before we do, like the video. If you have not done that, subscribe to the channel. I don't know exactly the plan, but I'm sure we'll have plenty of stuff coming during the actual season here as well. Also, scroll down in the comments at Yanni_bet, at the Bet Crushers on X. Make sure that you are following them. Also, the websites are in there for you to get write-ups and videos and all the different things that we'll have coming during the season. So go do it now. I give you permission. Take a minute off of your job and just do it. All right. Let's start out ranking the coaches, Yanni.
This was tough for me. I struggled, but I put D'Amico Ryans first. But there's an asterisk here because I think we're going to see. Because, again, now that they've got the target on their back, which we talked about, now that he's got a guy like Stephon Diggs there that he's got to keep having, like, let's see. It's kind of good when you're like, oh, this team wasn't supposed to be good, and they won, so you're a great coach. Let's see. I do think he's a good coach, so I'm going to give him that one. I went with Steichen second because I like what he brings from a scheming standpoint. I like how he game plans. I think he gets the most out of what he can, when I look at that. So I went with him second. And to your point, I went with Peterson third. And if you had asked me this 2 years ago, I mean, it would have been a no-brainer that Peterson would have been number one. I used to think like Peterson's this great, whatever. And I think, like you said, last year, he just kind of looked lost out there, and he just kind of looked like he didn't really know what he was doing. And, it's almost like some of that magic luster wore off. So now I'm like, maybe he's just a guy, maybe he was a guy. He was fortunate. He had a couple, good situations when he was at his previous stops and whatever. And then I put Callahan last only because I don't know, who knows? He could end up being a Sean McVay wizard who comes in and, maybe he's the top guy, but until we see something, to me, it's like, I think you got to put him at the bottom.
Yep. I'm exactly the same. Ryan, Steichen, Peterson, Callahan, for pretty much the same reasons that you said. I like what you said about we'll see if Ryans can prove it this year. I also think Steichen can prove it a little bit. I mean, he maybe has a little bit less to work with, but let's see what he can do with that, and what the coaching can do there. So, all right, let's do defense. We'll save offenses for last. Let's do defenses next.
So I went with the Titans first, and I have one concern here with Tennessee, and that's the pass rush. If they can't find ways to get to the quarterback, this defense could end up maybe not being very good. But if they can get any semblance of a pass rush, I think this defense is going to be really good because, again, I don't think you're going to be able to run on this defense. And I think their secondary is really, really good. So to me, all that's missing is potentially that pass rush. We'll see. Very important fact, but I mean, we'll see if they can get it, and again, maybe they can get creative with guys like Jamal Adams and blitz and, do things like, we'll see. But I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and go first. I went with the Texans number 2, kind of as we mentioned, because of their pass rush. I also like their secondary. So I went with them number 2. I went with the Colts third. We talked about how they're constructed. I don't necessarily love it, but I do like some of the pieces they have. I do think they should be decent against the run. So there's that. And then I went with the Jags last because honestly, like I said, other than Hines Allen and Trayvon Walker, I just don't like anything else on that defense.
I was similar. I went with Houston first. I also like the coaching there, and then Tennessee second. To me, this is a division where defensively, I think there are two tiers. I think
I
it's
would agree.
Houston and Tennessee, and then I had Indy third and Jacksonville fourth also. But I would say the top two are kind of close. The bottom two are kind of close for me, with a gap in between. All right, offenses, Yanni.
It was pretty easy for me on this one, at least at the top, and that was Houston. I mean, best quarterback, best weapons, I think, overall, good offensive line or average, at least offensive line. So pretty easy for me there. I struggled beyond that, though. I kind of went back and forth like, well, maybe this team, maybe that team. And, I ended up going with the Titans second. So I don't know, kind of to your point there, I think I did it like you said. I think their offensive line is going to be improved. I think they went from essentially no real linemen last year to maybe they've got 3 on the roster now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a
Yep.
pretty big improvement. But like you said, they've got good skill position players there. And, I just think that they have the most upside. So they could absolutely make me look foolish, right? I mean, they could, Levis could be terrible and throw 5 interceptions a week and, whatever on that.
Good.
But I went with them second. And then I actually went with the Jags third. And I struggled with that too between them and Indy. But really what it came down for me was, even though I think Indy probably, they're better in the trenches, I looked at this and I'm like, in the NFL, you got to be able to throw the ball. And I just don't think the Colts can throw the ball to what we talked about. So I gave the Jags, I put them at third there and I went with the Colts last.
Yeah, I had the exact same order. You sort of alluded to this in what you said. I think if you told me I should make my picks based on like floor, that the floor is the highest, I would maybe put Jacksonville second and Tennessee third. But I think the upside is so high for Tennessee that I would put them in second pretty easily. I'm just acknowledging that if Levis falls apart, if the offensive line has a couple injuries, it could end up looking bad there. But to me, it's Houston, Tennessee easily, and then Jacksonville and Indy. Again, it feels like two tiers to me.
Yeah.
All right, Yanni, let's predict it. What's the finishing order for this division?
Well, it's funny. So I'm going to tell you where I started, and then I'm going to tell you where I finished.
Yes,
so
I love it.
I started with Texans first, Titans second, Colts third, Jags fourth. That's where I started. However, when I went to the schedules there and went back and started really looking, I made some adjustments. And it was almost some last minute adjustments, but I still took the Texans first. It's their division to lose. And I'm not saying they can't lose it. I mean, they could, but I think it's their division to lose. I think that, as long as they handle business, even with a tough schedule, I mean, I think they should come away the winner here. I ended up going with the Colts second. And it really came down again to the fact that I just couldn't, with the Titans schedule, I couldn't keep them at second there. I just couldn't do it. So, I put the Colts there. I put the Jags third, and I actually moved the Titans to the bottom there. So, all because of schedule. And again, the relative uncertainty with the new coach and quarterback there. I just couldn't do it, even though I initially have them. To your point, if I were just looking at teams, you could sell me on having them second, no doubt. So feel free if you want to do that, because I hear you, man. But I ended up Texans, Colts, Jags, Titans is where I landed.
Totally hear you on the schedule. I'm going to do it anyway. I think I'm going Houston, Tennessee. Then I'm going to go Indy, and that pick to me is because of schedule. I put them and the Jags very close, but I have the Jags schedule. I have it significantly harder, and I'm going to go with the Jags to end up in fourth. I will say this, and I'm curious if you would agree or not. For me, the best bet division-wise here right now is the Titans, because I think plus 950 is definitely blown out from what it should. I could definitely see them even being plus 500 or plus 550, something like that. But I think these odds are well beyond where I see their chances actually being to win the division.
Yeah, and I think, just for whatever it's worth, I think on DraftKings they're plus 1050. So,
definitely shop it around. I haven't gone back and shopped it for a little bit. So,
no, I agree. I think if you're looking at pure value, I think, and I know we talked about that in Oh,
like
gosh,
with the Browns, right?
Yeah, the Browns. Yes, it was
Yeah.
like, why is this number? And I think that's the similar scenario with the Titans here, where to your point, plus 600 seems more in line with where they should be.
Yeah.
Maybe even I could even go with plus 750, but I mean plus 1,000. That seems crazy for a team that has firepower, has defense, in a division that's pretty competitive, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. When you get to those long shot odds, I want a team that has a high upside, right?
Sure.
Because if I'm betting 1050, I'm thinking it's probably not going to win, but I'd like high upside if I'm going to take a shot. So.
Absolutely.
All right, Yanni. Well, hey, man, this has been really fun, and I look forward to getting into some specific games now as we move on to the regular season. Thanks for all the time and the insight, and look forward to having a good and profitable NFL season.
The wait is over. Thanks for having me, man. Looking forward to it.
Yeah.